12:01. It's about 12:01, so I think we're going to get started. Uh, this is the Your Health Matters webinar series. So welcome. Good afternoon, and welcome to the fourth week of the live Health New England Where Your Health Matters webinar series. My name is Ira Klein, a Chief Medical Officer of Health New England, and we're excited to talk to you today about why conscious activity matters when we may not be moving as much as we should be while working from home, going or not going outside during the winter, or participating in our usual additional activities. I want to thank you for being here with us today, and hopefully we'll have some help and some answers. Our mission at Health New England is to improve the health and lives of people in our communities, which is why we're providing you with this total of 6 webinars discussing the various topics that you see on the screen as ways to stay healthy while living in the world of COVID-19. All webinars are recorded and can be found on our Health New England YouTube page shortly after the live presentation. You will receive a follow-up email with the YouTube link and a survey link. We will also post the survey link in the chat at the end of today's presentation, and your feedback is important to us as that helps us shape future webinars. So we want to thank you in advance for completing it and for being here today with us. So let's get started by introducing today's presenter, Michael Harris, Assistant Director of Athletics for Sports Performance at Fairfield University in Connecticut. Michael has worked at Yale and with the St. Louis Cardinals organization, New York Giants, Chicago Bears, and Buffalo Bills. And as he noted, with my cousin, he is a graduate from Springfield College with a BS in Applied Exercise Science and an MS in Exercise Science and Sports Studies. Today, he will discuss ways how we can learn how to incorporate new physical activity habits and what to focus on to create a new homeostasis that also includes nutrition and sleep. So Michael is going to help us with the reset button. If you have any questions during the presentation that you'd like answered at the end of the presentation, please enter that in the Q&A, not in the chat. You're also able to ask a question anonymously if you prefer. So thanks for your attention. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar. Please welcome Michael Harris. Mike, take it away.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to take a quick moment to thank Ira and everyone from Health New England for having me here. Really excited to talk about this. As you can imagine, a job like this is quite a passion for a lot of people. So I apologize in advance if I get a little excited as I talk about some of these things. Feel free to send any questions you have in the Q&A, and I'd be happy to answer those at the end, as well as shooting me an email. I have my email linked at the end of this as well, in case you'd like to discuss anything further. So I'm going to jump right in. So biggest thing right here is we're looking at our activities of daily living and how we're affected by COVID. So we call those ADLs for short. I'll refer to them as ADLs moving forward. Understanding our options, what goes on while we are at home, what we can do in terms of adjustments to be made in the sense of training, nutrition, and sleep and recovery. So we're looking at periodizing our training. We're going to talk a little bit about your plan and how to create a plan and goals, the sleep and recovery, nutrition, and then a take-home message, some actionable items in terms of what you can do when you're done with this and say, all right, now what's next for me? What can I do after this? So I want to make sure that you have something tangible to take home with you. So for our ADLs, our body's really good at finding homeostasis. So really right now we're at a new homeostasis. Your body is adapting to everything that you do, good or bad. So for instance, if I spend a lot of time sitting on my couch, my core muscles are more relaxed. And the more relaxed they are, the less strong they're going to be in general. The more I'm up and moving or training my core, the stronger that's going to be. In a very, very simple sense, that's really how our body adapts to everything that we do. In regards to routines and habits, most of us, a lot of us are now no longer having to commute to and from the office. We have a new office, your living room, maybe a converted nursery or whatever that might be. But the big difference is you are no longer moving around as much in most senses and socializing around the office, or at least taking the trips that you normally take in terms of in the car or walking around. Now, lastly with this is calories in, calories out has been this kind of traditional sense of energy expenditure and gaining weight or losing weight. That is a little bit of an older school mentality in the sense of all of our bodies do handle energy differently. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. With that, what is your net calorie balance? So are you expending enough calories to achieve your goals? Sometimes it might be too much, sometimes it might be even too little. And that's kind of a finer point that a lot of people don't really think about is, are you taking in too little for your body to actually perform at the rate that you expect? And then our third point right there, our second point, is nitrogen balance. Proteins, in terms of macronutrients, which we will talk about a little bit, they are the only macronutrient that carries nitrogen. So you may hear someone talk about being in a positive nitrogen balance. If you are in a program where you are maybe trying to gain muscle or gain weight, you want to be in a positive nitrogen balance, even if you might be taking in less calories, because that's going to help make sure that your body is able to synthesize protein and build, no matter what your balance might be. Now, understanding our options. How can we maximize new opportunities to train or be active near our home? The periodization of training, I'm going to go into a little bit more deeply after this, but really that's have a timeline set with goals in order to achieve. And the periodization of training can be very, very simple, but it really starts with just having a plan. What should we pay attention to or measure? Steps are very common. A lot of people use a Fitbit that you see on the bottom right. Heart rate, which you see in the polar strap in the middle, that is actually a wearable device around the chest, which oftentimes will communicate with something like a wristwatch as well. And then heart rate variability, or HRV. And that's actually the band on the bottom left. That's called a Whoop band. For people who might be a little bit more serious about training, the Whoop band actually measures the HRV, which is the time spent during and in between your heart rate or your beats. So every time the heart beats, you have some period of time between those, and that can shorten or lengthen based on your activity. And this is going to help measure something like that and actually tell you how recovered you are and how ready you are for your next bout of exercise. And that actually goes a little bit deeper and actually tells you, do you need more sleep tonight to be more ready to train tomorrow? So they're very nice new devices. A lot of these are Bluetooth capable, so they're very interesting new ways to monitor your training. And last one here would be like something like body composition, and that could be a skin fold. It could be a bioelectrical impedance, which measures your electricity. It could be even circumferences. So a lot of people pay a lot of attention to the scale, but may not necessarily pay attention to where that weight is shifting from, to or away from. So with body circumferences, it could be helpful to measure maybe around the waist, the umbilical region, the glutes, working your way down so that you have an idea of, if my scale says I'm up 3 pounds and I'm trying to lose weight, did it go up in the right or wrong regions as well? So what are your goals? This is going to affect what we measure. If you are trying to make your waistline smaller, or you are trying to make your biceps bigger, your goals are going to be different, and the things that you measure are going to be different as well. So those might be time under tension if you're strength training. It might be time active if you're looking to walk around miles or whatever that might be. And our goals can be very different. You might have a newborn child at home and you don't want your back to hurt every time you pick them up, right? Or you might say, I want to deadlift X amount of pounds. All those things are going to be individual, and all of those will affect what you monitor here. Now, when in doubt, do something. I often find myself spending a lot of time wondering what I should do or worrying about what's coming next for me in terms of the programs I put together. But sometimes the best thing to do is get up and move. Don't worry about spending too much time thinking. Spend a little bit more time doing. Even if those are smaller action items, get up and do something. That's going to be better than wondering how much or how little of something you should do. And if you're in doubt, start small and work your way up. For the periodization of training, there's a difference between exercising and working out. If you're just exercising, often you're training without some sort of plan in place. All right, when we talk about working out, often that is associated with some sort of plan with those goals that we had discussed. So what does your program look like? On the right side of the screen, you see the principle of progression. This is a really nice simplified breakdown of what training could look like with goals and timeline. So essentially, you are increasing your volume or intensity of training. It could be one or the other or both, depending on where you start. You're increasing one of those at least up until a point where you might, let's say, just get fatigued. Your body might start to say, okay, I've had enough of what we're doing now. And that's where we look at that planned recovery. That planned recovery is going to help your body kind of take a break, just reset everything. But that's not a very long period of time off. That might be a matter of a couple of days off in order for you to regenerate a little bit and then start again. And then the goal would be on that second wave, you are starting at a little bit of a higher phase than where you were the last time. And then that you can continue bumping up and up and up with that as you go through. Now, the pros and cons of today, a lot of times we have what we call Instagram coaches. You go on Instagram and you see that there are a lot of people who know a lot about what they're doing, and they're just going to show you how few carbohydrates they had today, or how many muscle ups they could do, or something like that. The thing is with a lot of those CrossFit coaches or Instagram coaches is they'll have a workout of the day, but not necessarily a goal set. All right, something that you are trying to achieve by performing those exercises. So really the important thing here is, what do you want to accomplish for today or for this week or for this year? That's going to be the most important thing. You don't necessarily have to perform 200 snatches. And if you're a CrossFitter, that's okay if you want to, and you do, as long as you're doing these things safely. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that these goals are pertinent to you. Now, with that timeline too, you want to think challenging, but attainable goals. So small enough that you know that you can attack these goals, but large enough that you know that you're going to put yourself out of your comfort zone, at least often enough that you are familiar with feeling uncomfortable. You might have heard this before, get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's really a big part of this, is do things that you have not done before. And that's going to challenge your body and help us grow in different ways. Now, on the flip side of this, you could look at something called overtraining, or what we call overreaching. Overreaching is really just before overtraining. So we want to make sure that with that progression, you're not doing too much too soon, because then certain things go wrong. We have body composition or compensation issues, excuse me. So maybe you have a stability muscle that is kicking in to help a larger prime mover, and that stability muscle is not built to have the same amount of endurance, and then things go wrong. So that's where people have these minor tweaks and strains here and there, because their body's not performing tasks at the full capacity, and then we can have things go wrong because we just push a little too hard too soon. You might also notice this when all of a sudden maybe you're getting a little bit less sleep at night, you're not eating the same, maybe a little bit less than you normally would, or you're finding less focus during specific tasks, or you're just a little more irritable in general. Now, something that's really cool is our sleep and recovery. And this ties very directly into pretty much everything else that we're talking about here. When you fall asleep, there's hormones associated with that in terms of your secretion, and the same thing for waking up. This all affects the central nervous system and how you are prepared for training. So this graph I think is really neat. It shows you your plasma melatonin in blue. That's the first thing I'd like you to look at. And if you notice the dark gray area, that is the highest when you are asleep. It starts to spike up right around the time that you should fall asleep. And then it starts to go back down or wane down at the time that you should be waking up. Now, on the flip side of that, if you look at cortisol, plasma cortisol in the black, that is lower when you're at sleep, and then that spikes up around the time that you should be waking up. Now, the human body is the coolest machine in the world. It does recognize when it's dark and you should fall asleep. It does recognize when it's light and you should wake up, of course. Now, the interesting thing is with our technology of today, we all spend so much time on our phones, not to mention the forward head posture that's associated with that. But the lights, not just the blue lights, but lights in general from our phones, from our televisions, that can distract our body from recognizing that it's late, that it's time to go to sleep. So often what I recommend for all of our athletes is that a half an hour before you're actually attempting to fall asleep, you turn off the phone, or at least put a do not disturb. You do not use the phone. Maybe pick up a book, or if you have a significant other, that's a time that you can catch up and unwind from the day. But your body, even if your eyes are closed, your body can recognize if it's light or dark. So if you fall asleep to the TV on, it can blunt that spike of the melatonin that we're looking for. And yes, there are gummies for people to help supplement melatonin, but your body can start to become a bit more reliant on that. And then you actually do not produce as much naturally because your body's expecting that supplementation. Now in the morning, with the light that usually comes in, unless you have blackout shades, your body actually starts to spike cortisol to help agitate you and wake you up. Which on the other side is why I'll recommend to people to get some sort of alarm clock that actually gets brighter as it starts to go off, because that light hitting your eyelids, even with your eyes closed, can help spike the cortisol and allow you to naturally wake up. And you might find that you naturally wake up a little bit more rested. And of course, there are apps and gadgets now that allow you to wake up when you're in the lightest amount of sleep as well. So all these things are going to help affect your sleep and your recovery. And to be honest, a lot of us don't get enough sleep to begin with. Usually around 7.5 to 8 hours is recommended. I know personally, I'm stuck sometimes at 4.5 or 5, and it catches up to us. So those are some of the things to be aware of with the sleep as well. Now with nutrition, I know there's kind of a lot going on here. I'm going to start on the left side with our big bullets and kind of talk through everything. We have macronutrients, which a lot of people are probably familiar with: your carbohydrates, your proteins, your fats. And then we also have water and alcohol, which a lot of people may consider to be macronutrients as well. Water does not carry energy in the sense of calories, but it is essential to life. And alcohol actually does carry calories. So a quick breakdown of each. Carbohydrates, 1 gram of carbohydrates is approximately it's 4 kilocalories or kcalories. So if you ever see calories with a capital C, that is actually what we call kilocalories or kcals. And that's where you'll see with the avocado toast on the top, that kcal, that's our unit of energy or calories in general. So I'll call them calories just to keep it simple. A gram of protein, very similar to the carbohydrates. 1 gram of protein is 4 calories as well. 1 gram of fats is actually 9 calories. So it's a more dense unit of energy, which is why people kind of have a love-hate relationship with fat, because it traditionally gets a bit of a bad rap. But when utilized correctly, it is a very good and smart source of energy for the people who know what they're doing. Now, alcohol also carries 7 calories per gram. So when we talk about fats having 9, alcohol has 7, which is more than carbohydrates and proteins. And one of the interesting things about alcohol as well is when you ingest alcohol, even if you just have a little bit, your body starts to partition how it allocates energy differently and uses the alcohol as your immediate energy source. So for people who are maybe trying to lose weight, but they are having alcoholic beverages, we'll say on an occasional basis, then every time that you do, your body is no longer processing and using the carbohydrates for energy as your primary source, but they're using alcohol as instead. And then of course, when people start to go a little further down the hole, that might actually change the decisions that you make around food as well. So possibly not only are you not using the whole foods as your energy source, but maybe you're choosing lower quality foods because of the influence of alcohol as well. Now, there are things like diets and fads. I like to talk about nutritional paradigms or clean eating in general, because you don't want to necessarily think about nutrition as a diet. A lot of times when it comes to something like a diet or a fad that you might read about, the problem is people jump head first and they do a pretty good job with it for usually 7 to 20 days. And at some point kind of fall off the wagon. And then when that happens, we usually put everything back on, and then we might even put a little bit more on after that as well. So we want to be aware of decisions that we make on a daily basis. And is this going to help make me more healthy or less healthy? Or in the sense of performance, I like to tell my athletes, is this going to help me perform better or not as well? Because those are all things that we want to consider here. And then the last part of that is, are you ready, willing, and able to start making better decisions on a daily basis when it comes to your eating? Does your kitchen or your pantry allow for you to make some sort of shift in terms of the food that you eat on a daily basis? Or are there a lot of processed carbohydrates and fats in your pantry that you might not necessarily be ready to let go of? So all of these are decisions that we have on a daily basis. When it comes to training, the timing of food is really important as well. Of course, right around the workout, immediately following your workout, your body is more susceptible to taking in nutrients. And that's our best time to supplement with things like our carbohydrates and our proteins. Typically, if you are, we'll say, an endurance runner, and this is kind of tying into somatotyping as well. If you're maybe an endurance runner or an endurance athlete, in terms of your somatotypes, which is body typing, you might be what we call an ectomorph. Your body responds really well to carbohydrates. And if you see at the bottom, carbs are not just bread, rice, and pasta, but fruits and vegetables. There are whole food carbohydrates, and then there are processed carbohydrates. So your body might respond really well to carbohydrates. That's fantastic. And in part of your post-exercise recovery, you might take in a 4-to-1 carbohydrate to protein ratio beverage, let's say. So maybe some sort of Endorox R4 shake or something like that, where if you have just very simply 10 grams of protein, you'd have 40 grams of carbohydrates. Okay, so that's 160 calories from carbohydrates and 40 calories from your protein. So that ratio is going to help supplement your glycogen. All right, so the sugar that's lost, which is carbohydrates, and then resynthesize your protein as well. So you might not need as much protein from that, but you might need more carbohydrates for your fuel. And then on the flip side, if you have someone that's closer to my build, I'm what you might consider an endomorph, more of a power athlete. My body might not respond as well to carbohydrates. So if that's the case, then I might have a lower ratio of carbohydrates to proteins and even to fats. So my body responds personally best if I have a little bit of a higher fat content and a lower carbohydrate content because of my body's response to insulin. We all have our own unique response to insulin, and you might have a greater sensitivity or a greater resistance. And a part of that could be based on the body types. And then the last one is our mesomorph, and that is your, let's say, bodybuilder, someone who puts on muscle very easily. They're typically going to respond well to a higher protein and higher carbohydrate diets. To be honest, they can often deal very well with a lot of diets if they are continuing to train as well. Now, if you see on the right, just a couple quick examples of some of the foods and calories that you might see. One slice of bread is usually about 100 calories. It could be anywhere from 80 to 120, 130, depending on the bread you're using. And then in a half of an avocado, you're going to look at roughly 120 to 180 calories. Now, that is, we'll say, a medium-sized avocado. Okay? So with peanut butter, this is really cool. Our typical guesstimate of peanut butter, for me personally, on the left, that's what I like to think of as my tablespoon of peanut butter. And really a measured tablespoon is what you see on the right, which is almost half as many calories. So when it comes to something like PB&J, I love just loading up as much as I could possibly put on there. I know that I'm not necessarily looking at 95 calories for my peanut butter. And then lastly, what type of bread are you having? So when I mentioned the calories from the bread, what type or brand of bread that you were looking at is going to influence this as well. The biggest thing that I can send home right now with bread is take a look at your nutrients and see if there's high fructose corn syrup or corn syrup in there. Those are really the biggest two things that I would say take a look at when you go to your pantry later today. Is there corn syrup in the food that I'm taking in, or is there high fructose corn syrup? That comes in the form of breads, condiments like ketchup. A lot of times your Heinz ketchup will have both high fructose corn syrup and corn syrup. And those are not necessarily going to handle in our body as well as some other things. Okay. And then lastly, what to do next. So the biggest thing here is creating goals. I want to make sure that on a daily basis, you are able to take something home with this and create goals on a daily or weekly or performance-based opportunity. So what does that mean? Again, if I'm saying, okay, I want to walk maybe 10 miles a day, then or 10 miles a week, excuse me. If you want to walk 10 miles a week, maybe you start with a mile today. Don't start with 10 miles today and see where you get. And then all of a sudden your knees are swollen and you don't want to walk for the rest of the week. That's often a problem that we see when people might start going to a trainer early on, is they say, okay, I want to get like this. And the trainer says, okay, let's do that today. And then the next day you can't walk. Chances are you're not going to go back to that trainer. What we want to make sure that you do is set up challenging but attainable goals again. So if that is performance-based, I'd be happy to help too. And again, I'll have my email in here. You can reach out and I can give you a hand on creating some of those goals based on your performance needs. But very simply put, you want to get up and you want to start to move and start small, because we want to make sure that this is something that you are able to do consistently and just creating better habits on a daily basis. A sports psychologist that I work with talks about doing a little, a lot. So that 1 mile a day, maybe to start off, and then a mile and a half after day 3 to build us up, is going to be better than that 10 miles today and then nothing later on. So do a little, lot rather than a lot, a little. And then we want to track. So if you are using some sort of wearable device, you want to track your steps, you want to track your calories, you want to track maybe the miles that you've run or swam or whatever that might be. But it's not going to help you if you don't actually measure it and track it. A lot of times we get afraid of setting goals because we don't want to miss out on achieving those goals. But really, that's the biggest thing, is it's the process. Don't worry so much about the journey, but worry about the process. Focus on that daily basis, getting better. And notice that if you slide a little bit here or there, especially when we talk about nutrition, if you have a bad day nutritionally, that's fine. We're all human. We're going to make those mistakes. The more important thing with that is that you don't make that mistake and then say, well, I made that mistake, so I'm just going to kind of keep going. Because a lot of people, we ended up doing that, myself included at times. If we make the mistake, recognize I did that. That was maybe a moment of weakness. I'm going to move on, and I'm going to continue to do what I was doing that I know works best for me. And also on the front side of that, try to make sure that if you are going to, let's say, clean out your pantry today and start fresh and have a whole new set of, produce and processed goods, whatever that might be, try to make sure that you're not thinking about loading up today on bad foods or alcohol, whatever that might be, in preparation of being really good tomorrow. Because all that does is set us back a step in terms of being able and ready to start that next step tomorrow. Now, one of the great things that I like is journaling. And this can be for your training and your food. When it comes to journaling for food, one of the really nice ones that you can use is very simple, is I ate this today, and around the time I ate it, this is how I felt. This is how I felt maybe 2 hours later. This is how I felt while I was training, if that is the case. This is how I felt the next day, or this is how I slept. To journal even a little bit, not just what you were eating and when, but how it made you feel, can be a really powerful factor in helping us recognize some of the foods that maybe our body is not as tolerable for. So if maybe lactose is an issue for you, but you haven't really recognized that, that's a really good opportunity for us to recognize something like that. Does milk agree with me? Do eggs agree with me? Anything that might present is going to be really helpful for you for the next step forward as well. And then what you can do is just see if there are habits or trends that develop based on what you are eating. And then when it comes to your training, that's a perfect alignment with your food, or especially if we're talking about your post energy consumption. All right. And how did I perform today? Did I walk my mile today? Did I maybe bench press today? Did I perform my Olympic lifts today? And how was that? How did I progress? Am I doing it based on what my coaches tell me, et cetera? So those are really important things to look at. Planning a week ahead. This is probably the biggest thing to take home, is have a plan early on. Because so many of us, we wake up and we're like, all right, today I'm going to X, right? Have a plan ahead of time so that you can also start to plan out your time to do those things. Because we are always going to prioritize. And then at the end of the day, you might find yourself saying, well, I was going to walk, but this came up and this came up and this came up. So my question would be, did you set a time aside to walk? And maybe put your phone on do not disturb while you did that, and catch up with a friend or whatever that might be. Those are going to be important things to look at. And then when it comes to food, planning a week ahead is crucially important as well, because you can understand what meals you're going to have and how to prepare your vegetables or your fats, whether that's cooking fats or added fats. So one thing I love to do is once my wife and I purchase all of our foods, we'll bring our vegetables home and chop everything up so that it's all ready for every time we're about to cook. So if we have peppers and onions that we're going to throw on the grill today, those are already chopped up in a Tupperware sitting in the fridge ready, so that as soon as we start the grill, we can throw those right on with some olive oil and let them go. And that'll help really knock down time for preparation in the moment. So if you're able to do that maybe every Sunday and Wednesday, so you kind of split the day, the week in half, that's a really good opportunity for you to get ahead on the preparations. Now, when it comes to the food, last part about that is making sure that you have the proper cooking fats and added fats along with your carbohydrates. So if you were going more processed carbohydrates, you're probably going to want a little bit of a lower fat content in that meal. We often look at those as an inverse relationship. So if you are going to have a higher carbohydrate, so maybe let's say a pasta dish, then adding a lot of fats to that is what we consider to be kind of a negative balance. So in that sense, we want moderate to higher protein, but lower fat. And then if you are eating possibly a diet that is a high fat and low carbohydrate diet, either on a meal to meal basis or a day to day basis, you're going to want to look at maintaining that same ratio. Now, for sleeping, plan your phone off, lights off time is really big. Again, that's about half an hour before you actually plan to fall asleep. And you might notice yourself falling asleep a little bit more quickly. You might notice yourself going into REM sleep a little bit more often, where you have, your vivid dreams, and REM sleep is what we call a rapid eye movement. That's our deepest level of sleep. You want to achieve that as often as possible. So you might notice you get there faster and you get there more often with this phone off, lights off time. And then alcohol actually affects this as well. Even with the consumption of alcohol, where people might feel like they can fall asleep more easily, you do not achieve that same deep level of sleep. So even if your body falls asleep more easily, you are more irritable and restless throughout the night. So you don't actually wake up with more rest. You wake up more irritable with less rest and less prepared for the next day. The last part about this, I would say, is meditation, yoga, stretching. Getting your body to move in ways that you have not moved before. I can tell personally, the last time that I've had to lateral lunge and reach overhead and open up my rib cage, it had been a while before I thought about that one day and started to do it again to help make sure that, again, I'm strengthening the core and then I'm working on certain movements. Because one of the things that happens with us aging is we start to do these normal ADLs a little bit less, and we start to be active in general a little bit less. And what happens is our body gets good at doing those things a little less. So try to be more active, move yourself in ways that you may have not done in a while. If you're capable of doing that, and maybe you need a doctor's supervision or a doctor's recommendation, but get out there and walk, jog, run, jump, do things that maybe it's been a minute and you kind of forgot how good that felt. Of course, if you're going to do something like that, proper warm up and proper cool down are very important right there as well. As we get older, those become more and more important to help prepare our body for all of those things. So those are probably my biggest takeaways. I want to make sure that people have as much actionable items to take home from this as possible. I did see a couple questions in the Q&A box come up, so I'm going to go to those right now. And if anyone else has any more, feel free to ask. So very first one from Maria. What do you recommend for a training schedule for strength training? Workout every day or a few times this week, or a few times a week? So the interesting thing about strength training is if you are training, let's say just your upper body, then chances are you're not going to want to train your upper body tomorrow in strength training. You do want approximately 48 hours for those muscle groups to recover. So if you split your day, a lot of times what we might do if we have athletes training 4 times a week is we might go a lower, upper, day off, lower, upper, and then the weekend. So you have 4 days with Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday off. And then so their lower day might be a Monday and a Thursday, and their uppers might be a Tuesday and a Friday. And that way you give those muscle groups adequate time to recover. If you are going to work out every day, I would just suggest that you do not train those same muscle groups too often, because like anything, you need to recover. And that comes from the core as well. A lot of people like to train the core every single day. It's great to train the core often, but you also want to let that recover just like any other muscle group, because otherwise you can start to overtrain. And not to get too deep, but if you train the anterior core very, very often and not the posterior core. So what I mean by that is the rectus abdominis, the transverse abdominis, everything in the front. If you train that often, but maybe not necessarily the glutes and the hamstrings and the low back, then it can actually pull on your hips and give you low back tightness. So everything has a balance. The abdominals and the glutes are reciprocating core muscles. So those are going to work in tandem to help make sure that we have a balanced core. So if one of those gets really strong and then the other one maybe not so much, you might feel like a low back pain. Right? And that also comes from sitting on the couch a lot too. So when we're in a seated position, our hip flexor muscles All right, so our psoas muscles, which connect to our spine, and then our leg or our femur, that lifts our knee up to our chest. That can get very short and very tight, and that actually will yank on the hips. And when that does that, that actually might make your hamstrings feel tight. And a lot of times it's not that your hamstrings are tight, it's that they're being stretched and they're a little weak. But what the problem is, and I might be going too deep, but we start to stretch the hamstrings, and then that actually makes the problem worse. And instead, what I quite often find with our athletes, especially for our rotational athletes who has to sit in class or sit on the computer a lot, is stretch your hip flexors and stretch your quads and actually strengthen the hamstrings and the glutes. So that might be a very simple quad stretch, is like a heel to butt stretch or opening up the hip. So an inline lunge pattern would be really good for that too, to stretch the front and then strengthen the backside. And then, is there a better time of day to work out? I would say in general, just do it. If you have a time of day that feels great for you, that's the best time of day. So if you're a morning person, I'm a morning person. If I want to train, I have to get up at about 4 o'clock so I can go weight lift before all of our sessions. That's what I'm going to do. And I'd rather do that than 8 p.m. Some people would rather do that in the evening, and that's perfectly fine too. Really, the biggest thing is that you are getting up and getting active. There has been research that shows that doing it early is better for you because you burn more calories throughout the day, since your metabolic rate is raised and then just plateauing or fizzling down as you go out throughout the day. So if you do have a choice and you do not necessarily prefer one or the other, I would do that earlier in the day to get yourself jump started. Now, the difference between BMI and percent body fat, this is a really great question. And so BMI goes along with the body composition that we had talked about before. All right, so the BMI is essentially your height and your weight in a measurement. So it's how heavy are you compared to your height. Now, there has been arguments against using BMI based on people who are strength training or bodybuilding, because they have a lot of muscle, so it shows a very high BMI. But one of the things that I've recently learned from BMI is really it's how taxing is our body on our heart. So a higher BMI is essentially going to say that our heart has to do this much more or less work. So that, historically is something that you'll see in the doctor's office. It's a good, simple indication of really how much work am I putting my heart through on a daily basis. And the percent body fat are often, let's say for the general population, going to be associated with the BMI as well. Percent body fat is going to be lower for probably a bodybuilder who has a higher BMI, but for a general population, if you have a higher BMI and you don't necessarily strength train, then we're most likely going to see a correlation between that and a higher body fat. And that body fat percentage, that can come from anywhere, but really is a culmination. And what we do at my school, I test body fat by using our skin fold or calipers. And we measure 7 sites always on the right side of the body. And that helps us understand in millimeters how much subcutaneous fat we're holding in certain areas. So then also when we train and we are trying to gain or lose something, we can help make sure that we're paying attention to that as well. So how can you tell what your body's response is to insulin? That's a really great question too. So one of the things that people have started to do in terms of blood work is measure A1C. So there's measuring glucose, which is great for in the moment. A1C is essentially a 3-month window of how your body has been responding to insulin. So a lot of times if you see a commercial for some sort of drug right now that lowers your A1C, that's what they're talking about, is your body's response to insulin. So if you see something like a number 7.1, that would be considered a high A1C. If you're looking at like a 4.5, that would be considered a normal range. So that's a really good indicator if you're looking at, let's say, the deepest way of finding this and getting blood work and doing that. Another thing is really if you've historically taken in carbohydrates and you notice maybe your waistline is getting bigger, but nothing else changes. Or if you've taken a lot of even Diet Coke and things like that, you're trying to lose weight, but you're taking in a lot of Diet Coke. Our body still recognizes the artificial sweetener in Diet Coke as sweetener, and we still have an insulin response. So if you're, let's say, trying to lose some weight, but you're taking in Diet Cokes as opposed to regular Coke, or maybe as opposed to water in most cases too, then your body's still spiking insulin on a daily basis. And after a while, the big thing here is that your body no longer responds to it in the same way. It starts to essentially say, okay, insulin is always high. I get it. I'm not going to worry about that right now. I have other things to worry about. So insulin sensitivity is really important to help make sure that we're shuttling things to or from storage in the correct manner. So along with that, I can go really deep, but I'll try not to. There are good and bad cholesterols that help move things around as well. HDL, or high density lipoprotein, is a good cholesterol that helps move things out of storage into energy utilization. So that is actually something too that you can look at in terms of how does my body respond to the things that I take, and that would come from blood work as well. I want to make sure I get to the next one. So I've been wanting to get in shape for a while now, but overwhelmed with what equipment to get. What is a must-have or top 3 home equipment to have if I just want to build muscle? Cool. I would say first and foremost, it might seem a bit unassuming, but a jump rope is usually the first thing that I'll recommend to people. It might not necessarily be for your traditional sense of gaining muscle, but it's great for the heart. It's great for elasticity. So if you are looking to build on the lower body, our elasticity of our Achilles tendon is really important. So getting that drive is really good as well. That's still a really good shoulder workout. Along with that, I would say, because you're saying maybe top 3, I would get some sort of kettlebell or kettlebells. My wife and I we have a couple kettlebells of different sizes, so we can perform multiple exercises with that. And then I would say, aside from that, probably a medicine ball. I would get a good soft toss medicine ball that you can use on a daily basis that won't necessarily, rip on you. So something with good reviews. You get with what you pay for with medicine balls. So chances are, if you get something for $20 on Amazon, it's going to last you about 2 or 3 weeks. I would go to something like Rogue Fitness, who do a fantastic job on things like medicine balls and their kettlebells. I think those are really good ones. Otherwise, maybe a selector set of dumbbells. With that, you can get like power blocks, or I think the Nordic Track company does selector dumbbells as well. What do you recommend when getting over COVID and being quarantined for 14 days, now trying to get back to working out? First and foremost, you definitely have to check in with your doctors. There are a lot of things that you'd need to consider or look into if you had tested positive for COVID. Myocarditis is something that I know has been one of the more common side effects of COVID. So the first thing you'd want to do is check in and probably have an EKG if you have not already. You may have done that already, but doing that and getting even just a PAR-Q, physical activity readiness questionnaire, in order to check and make sure that things are working properly and you're not going to get hurt doing that, first and foremost. Then I would start with walking or slow jogging, just to make sure that cardiovascularly your body's ready and able to handle this new adventure of training. Because I work with Division I college athletes, and I've seen all different side effects, including neurological side effects. So I would just caution to be aware of how your body's responding with small steps before bumping up to big ones. And then if you wanted to email me, Mary, afterwards, we could touch base a little bit deeper about that too. To start beginner weight training at home, is it okay if I only have 2 and 8 pound weights and bands to use? Absolutely. And the bands, depending on what sizes those are, if you have a quarter, half-inch, inch bands, whatever that might be, you can do a ton of things with bands. And there's one strength coach in particular that I follow who he's the band guy. His name's Dave, the band guy. If you look him up, he has a ton of different exercises that you could do with just bands. With the 2 and 8 pound weights, you can get really creative with that too, in terms of your pushing and pulling. Maybe you do some sort of push up hold where you push up and then you row with the lighter weights. You can do things like that. Any type of rotational exercises overhead. That's a really good way of spiking your blood pressure if you're trying to get more bang for your buck, is pressing up overhead. Again, under the right supervision, or just make sure that you're in a safe area when you're doing that. But those are really good options if you're a beginner.
Mike.
Yes. Sorry, Julie.
No, I mean, these are great questions. We can get going all day long with these questions. Thank you so much. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we have reached time. So I do want to say thank you so much. Such great information. And I think I'm going to have to look into that alarm clock that has the light. I like that.
Great.
So as you guys can see, Mike's email is up here. So if there's any questions that we did not get to, please feel free to email him and reach out. And thank you so much for your questions and attending today. So I hope you guys will be able to join us in 2 weeks, March 10th, which, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's going to be March already, but we're going to talk about why caregivers matter. So caregiving has changed so much since the pandemic. So if you're a working parent or you're taking care of ailing or elderly family members, and then you're juggling a career, you probably have feelings of guilt or being overwhelmed, this webinar will definitely be for you. So continue to share the series with your friends and family. Thank you again so much, Michael. We learned so much, and we really appreciate you being with us today. So I hope you guys all have a great rest of your week. And you will receive a follow-up email from Kathleen Bruno. I'm going to put a survey link in the chat right now. Help us out and take that survey. And then that survey link will also be in the email, okay? So have a great day, everyone.